Hello, hello. See people rolling in. Very exciting. All of you fantastically punctual people getting in right at the beginning. Really excited today. This is going to be a very fun one. This is one of my favorite events we do. Not only because I get to talk to Jay, but just because there's a lot of fun successes we share together. Looking forward to sharing with all of you. And while people are rolling in, let me start off by giving you a quick tour of the GoToWebinar kind of fantastically modern interface that's been the same for the last 10 years. So we will make heavy use of it because as we're going through, I am certain that you all are going to have some fantastic questions for us, and you're going to have some comments that you can make. So I'm going to call your attention to two different things. One, you will see there's a section called chat. Feel free to chat away in there. You can make snide comments about us. You can ask us questions. You can look for clarification or give us thumbs up. In addition, there's actually a questions and answers interface where you can actually put in questions and we can track them and make sure we get to them. So if you do have a question, you can put it in chat and we'll do our best to see it. But if you put it in the questions interface, we'll certainly give it a look and make sure we answer it. So with all that housekeeping behind us, I think we can go ahead and get rolling. So welcome everyone. Really excited to be here. This is our missions event on how the Boston Celtics modernize sports analytics in AWS. You know, we're here as well to talk about missions kind of contributions there. And the fact that we're the official cloud services provider of the Boston Celtics, even though I currently sit in Los Angeles. I'm a huge Celtics fan as a result of this relationship. I've gotten to know how great this organization is. So now let's do some introductions to who we are. So hello from Los Angeles. I'm Jonathan LaCour. That's my face about 15 pounds ago, prior to the pandemic. My background is engineering. I'm the CTO at Mission. I own product, platform, and service delivery, so all the fantastic consultants and engineers, project managers, and so on that deliver service to our customers, they're all in my organization. And I do a lot of executive sponsorship as well, working with customers because I really love it. And one of those customers is the Boston Celtics. In addition to some other things about me, like I said, I live in LA. I've got a lovely family, a couple kids, and I love to barbecue, and I enjoy a good bourbon whiskey. Oh, and I love football and basketball. So Jay, introduce yourself, please.
Hi, I'm Jay Westland, and I am CTO at the Boston Celtics. I actually have two verticals. I have technology with, IT vertical, and I also run all of operations and facilities, which is kind of strange, but that's really just because that's what I've grown up here doing. I've been here. Started part-time about 30 years ago and been full-time for 20 some odd years. And it's just sort of grown to the point that I own both of those things, although I probably spend more of my time on the tech side than on operations and facilities. And I also am an engineer. I was actually about 3 nanoseconds away from going to Georgia Tech where Jonathan went, but I did end up at Virginia Tech, a little bit down the road, a little bit up the road from Georgia Tech. So I have an electrical engineering degree. My background prior to sort of delving into IT was more semiconductor related. I did a lot of work in the 80s and early 90s in semiconductors, and transitioned to mostly an IT person for no good reason other than that's what the Celtics needed. The interesting story, the reason I started at the Celtics was because it was the first year in 1990 when the NBA started any sort of automated computerized scoring and statistics gathering. Prior to 1990, everything was recorded by hand. And so the NBA instituted a computer program to start scoring and statistics gathering courtside in 1990, and the Celtics had no computer person on staff, and I was in the right place in the right time, and I got to do that, and then I never left, so I'm still here.
It's fantastic, yeah. And
I've been working with Mission and Jonathan. Jonathan mentioned he likes doing this. We have done this a number of times, both in person and virtually. Before pandemic and since pandemic, we've been virtual. So
I certainly miss the in-person. usually have a great event, and we get to go to a game and watch Jay running around on the floor taking care of all sorts of things, and it's pretty amazing. So, and thank you, Jay, for being here again. I will say to the audience, I don't want to undersell Jay's influence at the Celtics, and they are at the forefront of technology, unlike many of their peers in the NBA. And I think that is in no small part due to Jay, right? Joining early on, being a technologist in the early days of what the technology could do, and being at the forefront. So I'm really excited to share kind of the history there. So one more piece of introduction is just a little bit about Mission and who we are. So Mission is an AWS partner. We are a Premier Partner, and that is the highest tier of partnership with AWS. And what that means is that we have been vetted by AWS based upon our actual experience with customers. And so, we have plenty of successful case studies and demonstrated our value to customers, which is why we're a Premier Partner. We were founded back in 2017, and we have over 60 engineers and 160 team members, 350 plus customers, tons of AWS certifications, and we are a 100% distributed team. And that really was partially true at the beginning of the pandemic. And since then, we have transitioned and said, this is the future of work. Let's embrace it. And so we are fully distributed now, and it's been working wonderfully for us. In terms of what we can provide for our customers, we have kind of this entire suite of services. You kind of think of us as your one-stop shop, right? Your AWS center of excellence. And we can do everything from, kind of project-based work like migrations and, large-scale POCs and things of that nature, to managing and monitoring your environment, providing kind of managed service, modern managed incident response, security services, and many other things in between. So you can see here kind of that broad suite, architecture, migration, management, and optimization, everything across that kind of spectrum. So if there's a thing you need with AWS, there's a good chance we can help you with it. All right, enough about us. Let's talk about the interesting stuff, the Celtics cloud journey. And it all begins with basketball analytics. And thinking Moneyball for basketball, if you've seen that movie. So maybe Jay, give us a little background on kind of, what the genesis of this was.
Yeah. Well, so first of all, the genesis was the NBA being very wise. As I mentioned, 1990, they decided to roll out some sort of computerized scoring and statistics gathering. And they very quickly also decided that it wasn't just good enough to collect the scoring and statistical information of a game on a computer. They also needed to then compile multiple games worth of data, all the games, into some database. The first couple of years, you actually couldn't do that. A game was a game, and they didn't add together in any system. But so when they first put this in place, they weren't even sure where they were going. But then they quickly said, "Oh, we get it now. We need to add all this data together so we can start looking at the data more analytically, multiple games together. How did the team do for the entire year? How did you do playing against East Coast teams, big teams, small teams?" So really goes to the NBA in the early 90s, recognizing the need to get everybody on a common platform for collecting, scoring, and statistical data, so then we can analyze the data. And while that was going on, some interesting things happened. One is computers got big enough and fast enough and small enough to really be useful doing this. Prior to the late 80s, let's say, you really couldn't pull this off because you just couldn't get the compute power in the right place in the right time to do a real-time thing. It is a real-time operation. No referee is going to stop a basketball game because Jay puts up his hand and says, "Wait, excuse me, I have to reboot the computer. You can't play your game." So there were a lot of technical things that were coming together as we exited the 80s into the 90s that let us start collecting everything that happened during the game into a computer system, and then ultimately into a bigger database where we could start querying and analyzing that data. And the NBA was pretty quiet about this. That's why Moneyball I shouldn't say everybody, a lot of people read Moneyball, went to see the movie, and think of baseball as really forging ahead in sports analytics. But quietly in the background, the NBA and the NBA teams were doing that anyway, even before some of that. And so that's sort of the genesis of where this comes from. Early 90s. Red was still around when I started. Lighting a cigar in this picture. He would also have been known to light his trash can on fire every once in a while. And he supported this move to technology, even though he didn't understand it. I had many conversations with Red. He would teach me things. I would teach him things, but he didn't really quite know who I was or what I did, but he would affectionately call me that TV guy. So you'd hear him yell down the hall. He'd say, "Where is that TV guy?" And so that was.
That's fantastic. That's a new anecdote that I haven't heard before, Jay. So we're going to have to keep that one in the presentation. That's really good. And I want to call out that, I think you're absolutely on point around the NBA sort of in the background was doing some pretty incredible things here, right? And to me, the fact that there's data really represents the opportunity, right? Whenever we have a whole data and analytics machine learning practice, and when we meet with customers and they're thinking about what to do, we always let them know your data is your potential, right? And it's not to say that you should be gathering every single piece of data that you possibly can and storing it forever, but to the extent that you can find things where you'll be able to extract some insight or you believe that you might be able to, that represents opportunity. And that's what the MBA really provided, was that opportunity. And let's talk a little bit about the sources of data that the MBA provides. There's actually many, and there's some from external sources as well.
Yeah, so the most basic one is sort of what I would refer to the box score data or the play-by-play data, and that is what's entered courtside. That whatever, Michael Jordan took a shot from 15 feet on the left side and he made it or missed it in a certain clock time. And that very basic data is sort of the box score and play-by-play data, which is what we've been collecting the longest. And that still is a very important source of data, because not only does it tell you who made and missed what shots and lets you compile the box score, it also can do a lot more, because it tells who was on the court at a given time and how one lineup can work against another lineup. And so that still is a largely important data source for us. There's also much more detailed data now coming once we could get powerful video analytics. So Second Spectrum does tracking of the players with video. So we now know in video speeds, roughly the 1/30th of a second increments, where every player is on the court by interpreting the video and how they're moving. And so we have this whole set of X, Y, and Z axis actually data of what the players are doing. So not just that somebody made a shot at a certain time, but where everybody was coming into that shot, where they ran from, how fast they ran there, how high they jumped, how they turned, how close they were to each other. All of that sort of representational data from that we interpret from the video. And people say it seems crazy to interpret from the video. There are other ways we could do this, and there are other ways we could do it. We could put a tracking device on every player in some sort of microwave grid or something, but it turns out that the cameras that are cheap and compute time being cheap, that video is still really the most cost advantageous way to get this data. So we have this whole player tracking data, which is what really grew the size of our database. We people always, oh, you're doing big data. The data prior to using the tracking, adding the tracking in, which has maybe been the last decade or so, wasn't particularly big. It was
medium data.
Medium data. Yeah, we did a big data project. We didn't really have big data. We only had sort of medium or small data.
Yeah.
Then we also, there's other things that this is about, or the game that we're playing. We also have other data sources like amateur and overseas basketball data as well, that all could become part of our sort of data warehouse, data lake, whatever you want to call the database itself.
Yep. And I think the really interesting thing here is this visualization you see on screen, the ESPN screenshot. This is not just data that the Celtics have. Second Spectrum has an agreement with the NBA to basically instrument every single arena, right, in the NBA with these cameras and provide this data. So really, it is up to the teams, to the organizations, to really take advantage of that, right? And so you have to get this edge, and there is this level playing field to a certain extent, but your organization has to care. They have to see the potential in the data. They have to understand how it can be a differentiator and advantage. And you can see the reason there's this screenshot is ESPN also has access to this data, right? And that's how they do the in-game telemetry, and they show you things like, like you see here. And so to me, again, competitive differentiator and opportunity. I would love to talk about kind of how we got from where we were to where we are today. Because to me, the best part about this is before, Mission was involved, Jay and the Celtics were making some initial progress on this and really doing some good work. But it's very interesting how the evolution of the architecture has taken place. So Jay, maybe give us a little bit of insight about that.
Yeah, so back before I met Mission, and before the cloud was a word that meant compute resources in other places, we largely did everything in our own data center. Actually, behind that door you see right behind me was where most of it lived. And so we would get data from other sources, would pull or push or whatever onto some servers that would live here, and then we would ingest it into a database. For many years, maybe even more than years, decades almost, we use Microsoft SQL for that database. Actual little side note here, this one you might not have heard either, Jonathan, is that in the very early days of this project, there was only the one data source, that box score play-by-play data, and the back-end database was barely a database, but it was Microsoft Access, which is somewhat of a precursor to MS SQL. But so we grew with many generations of improving that database in MS SQL, and then we started adding these other data sources. And the output originally was stuff that only like a programmer could deal with. Somebody would have to write a specific query or a specific SQL report to get specific data out. It was not really interactive at all. So a coach would just get a bunch of reports on paper, and a coach could say, oh, I'd really rather see, shots over minutes played instead of, shots over the game or whatever. And the programmer would then have to go change the code and run a different report.
Right.
But we did it, and it worked, and it all ran right in this room behind me.
Yeah, which in addition to providing you with the initial kind of value, you can see there's something here. It also did a good job of probably heating your office, right? In a very inefficient way, but that's the beauty of having a data center behind your office. It's like, oh, I'm getting some warmth behind me.
16 kVA UPS back there.
Yeah, exactly. And this is not uncommon, right? When you're proving things out and trying to figure it out, take it simple, right? Get the data in, process it, get into a database where you can start poking around, right? And this is when you see the value prior to migration. And I love this because this is a view that you said comes from your own desktop from years ago when you were very first starting to think about, kind of VMware, putting things in Amazon. Maybe give us a little bit of insight on that.
Yeah, so the one thing that happened even before we went to cloud computing is we virtualized things. So instead of a SQL server and a data collection server or whatever, we were able to still have those virtual servers, but they ran in VMware, and that really improved the efficiencies a lot. Space, it improved a lot. Cabling, everything that VMware and modern virtualization really helped. We went through that phase, but still knew that eventually that it wasn't the right answer. And along came an old friend of mine that was part of Mission, and a prior company that joined forces with many others to become Mission. And Glenn said to me, hey, we have this thing that's sort of this cloud computing I'm playing with, and it's at Amazon. And I'm like, really, Amazon? I buy books at Amazon. He's like, no, well, so Amazon is getting into sort of the data center business too. And they have this thing called AWS, and he explained it to me, and I was intrigued. and I knew that it was going to have a lot of legs, but I wasn't even sure what to do. I was like, okay, great, but like what do we do? I've got my VMware, I'm happy. Dell and EMC are sponsors of mine. I can't really, can't just say, here, take all my stuff and put it at Amazon. So together we decided there was room for some of this basketball analytics stuff, and it made sense to start slowly putting some of the pieces of the basketball analytics infrastructure into AWS, and lo and behold, it was like it exceeded my wildest expectations. Sometimes I say in the early days when we were making this transition, I don't know, what, 8-9 years ago or something, it was sort of like crack cocaine, and I was addicted, but it really worked well. Luckily, I came out the other side without being harmed.
Absolutely, and to me, again, it's that potential, right? Your data was potential. You started to turn that into value. Then you saw, well, what if I had more compute? What if I had more scalability? What if I had, sort of infinite power at my fingertips? And that's the addiction right there, right? So let's talk about
the power. That's a really good point. The power and the performance. I always, even in the early days of this, had a dream of the basketball coaches actually interacting with the data rather than, I said, we had to give them reports. And that's great because they can see the data and get some insights. But I really wanted the coach to interact with the data, because a programmer doesn't think like a coach. No. So it needs to be a coach that they need to be able to interact with the data. The coach is looking at a piece of data, a screen, or whatever, visualization of data, and say, oh, that's interesting. Why did Johnny, player number 3, shoot so well last night, or defend so well, or whatever, and then look into that further and try and glean some insights. So that requires performance. And which you only really can get in the cloud. You can't build that yourself, or at least I'm not big enough and rich enough to build it myself.
Right. And actually that's a perfect transition into this, right? Because what it looked like before is the Basketball Intelligence Agency, the BIA, as we refer to it here, it ran, as we said, in some compute that literally was sitting next to Jay's office, and it did work, right? But under the hood, you guys are using this statistical processing language called R, right? And it really does require this big iron, right? Big, expensive servers. Now, when you get data in, you have to process it all, right? And usually you don't have data until you do, and then you have a very short period of time to actually process it. So you had bandwidth constraints in getting the data, into your kind of data center on-prem, and then you had to have these big expensive servers that were running mostly idle, and the cost was high, performance was low. And I think the critical point to talk about here is, what's the main problem? Well, Jay, if you're trying to enable your coaches, when do they want the data? When do they want the access to the data?
Before it happens.
Exactly, as soon as humanly possible. And before we did this transition, data processing took long enough that you didn't get analysis over 24 hours until over 24 hours after the data was generated. Meaning you're not getting data from yesterday's game or last night's game. You're getting data from games a couple days ago.
Right. So if you play back-to-back, which we do play a lot of back-to-back games in the NBA, I'm looking at our schedule for this year. We have a lot of games, 2 days. So you weren't getting the prior game for your current game. You were getting at least a couple days back. And so that was definitely a problem. The coaches I want last night's game right now available, and it never was, because the process just took that long to get the data in and then process the data. Took that long.
Yep. And so this was sort of step 0, right? Like, what are we going to do to solve these initial problems without, kind of lifting everything up into AWS? Let's start exploring. And so phase 1 was to solve for these 3 priorities, right? Improve performance, reduce cost, and efficiency operationally, right? So it was a bit of a lift and shift, but of a small subset of the overall architecture. So the first thing here is, we talked about the big iron in Jay's office, right? It was mostly sitting idle, right? Well, AWS offers you compute on demand. It's a utility model. So you can shut them down when not using them. You can scale it up when you need to. You can get much more compute power than you could get, or that you would be willing to get, on-prem, because you can only use it in these incremental kind of bits, so that makes it less expensive. And then I don't know, Jay, you probably have some pretty good transit coming into the office, but I'm guessing that AWS has better global bandwidth than you do.
Yeah, bandwidth has been the game changer in our entire world, but certainly in this little world I lived in, the bandwidth became a huge thing, that the server to server connectivity and server to outside world connectivity, the improvements there as we started to migrate things to AWS. Again, another place where it sort of exceeded my expectations.
Right.
I liken it to a backplane architecture. I'm an old computer builder from big computers, and so we used to plug big compute boards into backplanes so that they could communicate with each other very fast, very quickly. And so Amazon kind of gives me a much bigger backplane for the computers to talk to each other than my little 1 gig Ethernet, or at the time probably 100 meg Ethernet we were running. So bandwidth lets those things communicate much better, and that's what really improved a lot of our time to data being done.
Yeah, and not to mention the fact that the volume of data was increasing dramatically, right? And
every day, right?
Every day. And so that makes it even more important. And then to me, this third bullet is one of those ones that's sort of an unsung hero of using AWS, which is there's all these managed services you can take advantage of. I don't know about you, but Jay, you've probably managed more databases than you care to admit, and I certainly have. And there is nothing more exhausting to me. I'm not a DBA. I know my way around a database. I can certainly optimize and do things like that, but it's a lot of work and effort. And the great thing about RDS in AWS is that it's this fully managed service. You can just put everything in there and say, help me with the scaling, the backup, reduce my operational burden to near zero, and that let you focus on solving the problems here, right?
Yeah, right. Running a SQL Server or a SQL Server farm, whether it's Microsoft or other SQL, was never fun. Like nobody ever really wanted to do that, and there were no IT people that were ever particularly good at it. I shouldn't say that. I was certainly never particularly good at it, but I learned to deal with it.
Right. And AWS refers to this as undifferentiated heavy lifting, which I love that phrase. I think it's very accurate, right? Especially when you're a small organization, right? The Celtics are this huge brand, but you don't have 1,000 people in your IT organization, right? You've got a small team. And so, this is heavy lift. You could go out and hire and have someone manage this for you. But that's not really a good use of your money. That's not really a good use of your resources and your budget. You want them working on the value creation, right? Like, what can I do with the data? Not operating in the SQL Server. So definitely an unsung hero.
I try, by the way, that's a mantra I try and use across our entire company. I always tell people, let's stop trying to do things we're not good at, and let's find other ways. Let's find partners that can do things, or find other ways that are easier to do than do something hard that we're not good at. And so it's just another example in IT.
Absolutely. Awesome. Okay, so phase one, we ended up moving a lot. We moved over 99% of the actual platform up to AWS. The initial goal was to move less, but it just made a lot of sense, and reduce that processing time by 75%. So that means that instead of a 14-hour to 24 to 14-hour processing time on average, down to 4 hours, which to Jay's point, happier coaches, happier analysts, because they have the data they need when they need it, right?
Which 4 hours was just enough. That was kind of the number we needed, because in the NBA, if there's games on the West Coast, the data from those generally wasn't available till about 2 a.m. Eastern time. And coaches, the data heavy coaches, at least, are up early in the morning. They're up about 6. So 4 hours was the exact right amount of time to be able to deliver the new data to the coach before they got to their desk. So it fit perfectly.
So phase one, kind of a very good success, because we were just meeting that mark. We were showing the value of, like, we pulled that in an entire day, right? Now you've got it, but it's still riding that line, right? And there's certainly more to do. So let's talk about phase two. So this is really about replatforming and optimizing, right? So this actually follows a lot of migrations that we do with customers, right? You start simple. Start with a more of a lift and shift approach, taking advantage of simple things you can do, like the utility model of AWS. You're not changing how things work fundamentally necessarily, but what you're doing is saying, well, okay, instead of having one kind of a fairly large server that's sitting idle most of the time, I can have access to this extremely large amount of compute power, but only run it when I need it, right? And so that's things you can do without changing too much about your architecture. But in phase 2, it was really focused on some of the other aspects that require replatforming and optimization. So resiliency, cost reduction, additional performance improvements, the elimination of legacy, right? And this is, to me, a huge factor. Jay and I have talked about modernization frequently, right? Because unburdening yourself from legacy is one of the most important things you can do to empower your teams to innovate, right? And let's walk through a couple of those things. So if we were in a live audience, I would ask you all to raise your hands now. And I know many of your hands would shoot up. How many of you have a significant cost represented by licenses to Microsoft? Everyone's hands go up, right? So one of the things we did was we helped move a lot of that burden away by migrating things to Linux. So we moved every single Windows server to Linux, and that reduced that licensing burden. It also increased efficiency, right? And we get more out of the same size of an instance running Linux than having necessarily the overhead that Windows can represent, depending on your use case, right? And had a very high degree of quality. So that was a huge win.
I think the Linux thing does really well at sort of applianceizing the different jobs that needed to get done, whereas using Windows servers for this is almost like overkill. It's this big, huge operating system that can do 300 different things, but we were just doing one thing with it. And the Linux thing sort of lends itself to these appliance-y kind of applications more. And there's a bunch of different jobs, but we just sort of dedicate little Linux servers to the different ones, and sometimes bigger servers to the bigger ones.
Right. Exactly. And the next thing we did was sort of adopting native and more modern services, both in AWS and just generally speaking, right? And so you'll see here a lot of it has to do with the data layer. So both that first bullet with the MS SQL RDS enhancements and Redshift. So we implemented Redshift because when it comes to data, there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution, right? If you have a historical data, you want to use something like a data warehouse versus sort of like live active, kind of in pipeline data. And we used Glue for ETL. And so we had a much more robust kind of solution there, more modern solutions, and improved some performance as well with, implementing Elasticache, right? This was largely on the web side of things, but definitely a huge boost to the overall performance of the environment. And this last one is my favorite bullet. And Jay and I have talked about this a lot. This is sort of the magic to me. All of this up till now has been really cool, and we've seen some really interesting things, and reducing operational overhead and increasing performance. But this is something that is very difficult to do unless you're in the public cloud, which is using infrastructure as code. And that means that the entire environment we kind of represented in Terraform, and we could tear it down and rebuild it on demand with single-click deployments for disaster recovery. Data was being replicated across regions. Horizontal scaling is enabled on the web front end for resiliency, and it's all deployment automation. So this is when you really start to see like, okay, now we're peeling back the layers of the onion, and there's some real value here.
Yeah, the Terraform thing, amazed me, and I'm a complete novice at it, but the idea of it, I completely get. I can go in, I can log in, even at my age, I can log into the Amazon console and I can build a server in 20 minutes or something, by clicking around and configuring things. But to be able to store hardware configuration, so to speak, in lines of code was just, it's just amazing, and it's really changed our view of how we do this, how we do resiliency and disaster recovery, how we make changes, and at the same time, it's really helped our repeatability, and so everything is almost self-documented because the code is the machine, and so it does so much helping me sleep at night, let's say.
Yes, and I think the other really fun part about this is Jay and I talk a lot about the team, right? And when I say the team, I mean the people that are on the mission staff that work on the Celtics engagement and the people on Jay's staff that work on the Celtics engagement. And together, there's this incredible amount of collaboration that is enabled. And it's really fun to be in a meeting with these guys and gals and seeing all sorts of wonderful progress together, and things like watching a Terraform, kind of action kind of play out on screen, and having the team kind of live making edits and doing experimentation. And that's really enabled. Like, iterating on your infrastructure is hard to do without something like infrastructure as code. And having these distributed teams working together and collaborating, being able to manage that, version control it, see it live, more rapidly iterate on it, is just a game changer.
Yeah, and as Jonathan mentioned earlier, this team was remote before pandemic,
Right.
And there were a few people in a few offices, now completely remote and geographically diverse. Is we have a programmer that works for us that happens to be in Canada. We have some people locally here in Boston. Mission has people all over the country. We do a weekly call where everybody comes together, and
Right.
we've been doing it by Zoom for many years, and they're from all over the country, and it's been great. But the collaboration works really well, and that's what's needed, because there's so much that goes on to build an infrastructure of this complexity that there's not going to be, you can't be an expert in all of it. You need a bunch of subject matter experts that
Right.
can join together and collaborate to build the overall systems. And that's what we have on that team that meets weekly. And then when we're not meeting, everyone goes off and goes their separate way and does separate jobs, and we come back together.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I take it like but I take very little credit. I'm there because I sign the checks and write the POs, but there are a lot of very good software and infrastructure and operations people in that team.
Yeah, they really are amazing, and I similarly don't take much credit, right? It's the team that we've created an environment and a strategy for them that allows them to just thrive. And here's again the result of phase 2. 25% cost reduction, which is not insignificant, and an additional 15% improvement in data processing. So you'll recall we were right there on the edge, that 4 hours. Pulling that in by 15%, it gets harder and harder to make progress as you get into these smaller and smaller numbers. But that really made a huge difference as well, because now you're getting under the threshold, and with a high degree of confidence, you're not going to miss, right? You're going to have the data ready. And then again, enabling DR and innovation with infrastructure as code is pretty fantastic. So let's talk about what we did next, right? Because we haven't stopped. So now we're actually working on, this is mostly in progress or complete at this point, which is a fully modernized analytics architecture. And I think one of the key things you'll notice here is there's a lot more kind of horizontal scale that is enabled these days, right, by the new architecture. And that dramatically improves things like processing time, because you can shard things out, you can process in chunks, and you can kind of spin up and out rather than just getting this big iron kind of approach. You can kind of scale out horizontally as well as vertically, and using Apache Airflow, and that's a scheduler and executor for us to make the jobs and the workers go, and lots of other wonderful things going on behind the scenes.
Yeah, I know that Luigi is our programmer. I mentioned our database programmer, Celtics, and he likens Airflow to me when I try and understand what it is to the way we used to do it in SQL Server. Used to have these scheduled jobs. I forget, there was some specific module in SQL Server that would do those sort of scheduled task things.
SSIS, yeah.
SSIS, there you go. SQL Server integration or something.
Server, I think integration server, I don't remember. But yeah.
But anyway, Airflow is like so much more efficient at being able to schedule tasks and monitor things going from one place to another. And when this finishes, okay, now Airflow, if that thing is finished, take it over here and do the next thing, or do it every morning at 2 a.m. because this is what you do. And so Airflow has been a huge help on sort of this scheduling of all of these different things that have to happen, from getting data in to getting the data into, in front of the coach.
And it's pretty elegant as well. I think is kind of the nice thing about it is you can, while it is sophisticated and there's a lot going on, you can fit it in your head, right? Which is pretty helpful.
Yeah,
All
so
right.
yeah, although it's more big data than it used to be, it still isn't really the big data, right? It's not big compared to
Right.
Amazon or Fidelity or whatever those really big companies use for
Yeah.
data and analytics. But it's grown and grown and grown. And at every step of the way, that we've talked about through these slides, each iteration we're doing more analysis and more
Right.
on more complexity on more data. So it wasn't just the same data and the same complexity that we were getting faster and more efficient. We were also adding data and sources and
That's a
output
great point.
types and complexity on the output too. That dream of the coach interacting with the data improved at every step of the way also, to the point that I don't know if I don't think we have a screenshot of that, but the coaches do indeed interact with the data now in a web front end. And we have one programmer who mostly focuses just on that front end, on that interface layer, visualization of the data for the coaches, and that's currently in that node front end down here.
Yes. Yeah, in the bottom here, the BIA Coaches Analytics website is what you're referring to. I also think it's really interesting to talk about the trade checker, right? So it's not just in-game data that you're using. You're also thinking about like the draft and doing trades and all sorts of fantastic things like that.
Right. Yeah, that is true. That I think more of the day-to-day coaches working on a given game, but we have another group of people, scouts and coaches and analysts that are looking at the more long-term. Who do we draft? What kind of trades can we make? What does
Right.
that do? What financially works? What financially doesn't work?
Yes.
What could we do to make it financially work? And that all happens out of the same bunch of infrastructure, but with different end customers.
Right. Yeah, and just to call back one more time to your point, which I think is really a good one, the efficiency of shrinking the time isn't just about enabling the coaches. It's also about enabling us to process more data and get more insights, right? And you still have to fit in that window, right? But if you're more efficient, then you have more time, more slack in that window that you can use to do additional processing, generating more insights, adding more data sources. So it isn't quite as straightforward as it may seem on the surface. So let's talk now about phase 3. So this is what's kind of going on now. Most of that other stuff has been completed. There's a couple things in there that are in here, but so now it's all about availability, developer experience, security, and performance, right? This is a huge differentiator. This is a competitive advantage for the Celtics. So security is obviously important for a number of reasons. There's lots of proprietary data and information in there, and continued focus on that is obviously critical. So some of the other activities in here, moving from Microsoft SQL to Aurora, we actually have been kind of investigating that and doing a POC using AWS Babelfish to facilitate some kind of multi-region approaches here, and not requiring a major application rewrite, right? That's sort of a key thing here. You can take advantage of more modern AWS services without necessarily needing to completely rebuild what you're doing. And there's more in here as well. So we've talked a lot about instances, right? And EC2 instances, and that's great. But investigating ECS Fargate, right? And containerization, allowing for more ephemeral data processing, less to manage, and for things like R, which need to run on an EC2 instance, you can kind of do some additional auto scaling, right? So you can do on-demand scaling jobs, right? Or processing jobs. So if there's something that falls outside of the regular data dump, you can spin up an additional, kind of on-demand data process.
Yeah, the auto scaling is big from a cost efficiency standpoint. Our two statisticians, would use every byte of memory I would let them buy to do their R work and to do their matrix multiplies and inversions. But I don't want to pay for that memory all the time, but I want them to be able to get to it when they want to run something big. So that's the auto scaling has really helped us to let them be efficient, but not pay for tons of big memory all the time.
Right. Right.
And,
Yes.
and processing goes along with that too,
Yeah.
somewhat. It's a little bit of both for the processing and memory.
Right. Right. Yes, and getting into the additional, when you get into the world of containerization, it's important to do things like, build out your entire automation for generating your, kind of Docker image automation, and also doing vulnerability scans and all of that as we're generating these images. And so that's code pipeline and code build, or AWS services that we're leveraging for this. And in addition, starting to take advantage of serverless, right? Using Lambdas for resiliency. So doing a lot of helper work right now there, but I think there's more opportunity for us as we continue to improve, to take advantage of even more ability to say, like, I don't want to manage any of this. I just want to execute my code, please, which continues to drive efficiency. And Lambdas are also an incredible way to drive scale, right? All right, and then obviously security and cost optimization are a huge thing as well. So Jay has the pleasure of working with one of our cloud analysts, Jason Gay, who is an absolutely fantastic guy and does a wonderful job. And we instrument your environment with Cloud Health, which is one of our partners, who provide a great tool for kind of looking at your environment and making sure your cost, your security, are all in line. So generating custom reports, helping you save cost and reduce cost, and in addition to all the security work, which we can talk about.
Yeah, and we also take, the Celtics have another partner in the cybersecurity space, and we take a lot of that cloud health data over into the SIM and other security tools that reside with another vendor. In a modern API-driven world where data just moves around from API to API, we take that over there and get insights on the security site, both directly through the AWS and Cloud Health infrastructure, but also looking along with other security data from other parts of our user base and infrastructure.
Yeah, that's a good one. I'm glad you brought that up. That integration with the SIM has been, it's one of these things that I think we didn't expect to be as effective as it was necessarily. Like, we were a little bit nervous about, like, we funnel all this data. So we're doing Security Hub, Guard Duty, we've got Cloud Health data, we've got all sorts of information. How is this going to work with the SIM? And it ended up being pretty effective and interesting, right? Definitely made an impact.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes the SIM tells you things. Generally, luckily, the SIM tells you things that make sense, but sometimes it alarms and, hey, how come this machine just got destroyed or got built, right, or this administrative user just got created, and we get alerts like that, and then you can go and investigate them. And so far, all times have found out that they've been known events and not problems. But if there were a problem, we'd get alerted from numerous directions.
Yeah, exactly. So perfect. Well, that's kind of the progress we've made. And I think at this point, what I'd love to do is, before we talk about, Jay's experience working with Mission as a partner and kind of what the value is there, I would love to remind you all that we are absolutely excited to take your questions. So please feel free to start peppering those in the chat and the Q&A interface. While we're talking this through, we'll monitor that and make sure we have plenty of time to answer those by the end. But Jay, talk to us a little bit about what it's like for Celtics to have Mission as the official cloud services provider.
Yeah, it's been a great relationship. I pride myself in my outside third-party relationships. We run an extremely small organization. Currently, IT is 2 people. We're down 1, should be 3. But it's so small, and I don't really have a desire or an intent to build a lot of expertise here. I would rather use expertise from third parties because it gives me the terminology I use to use breadth and depth. That Mission gives me breadth and depth across the AWS space that I could never build myself, because it would be crazy to put on enough people for the Celtics to build that, and that's what I get out of Mission. And it's truly been a partnership. It is they give me the breadth and depth, but also act as an extension of us. They're not off doing whatever they think is right. They're doing what we think is right. We interact. Our programmers and our data analysts have input into where we're going with the infrastructure, and with the overall architecture. And it truly has been a real partnership.
Yeah, thank you for that, Jay. And I couldn't agree more. Like, it's been a fantastic partnership. And I think the thing that really makes it sing is that acknowledgement, right? When you have a cloud services partner, it really is a relationship-driven thing, right? And you have to make sure you have the right people in the right seats and a good structure to enable them to collaborate. And on mission side, we have a cloud solutions architect, a CSA, who kind of sits at the forefront and is that trusted AWS advisor. And then on your team, Jay, you've got your small but mighty team who really deeply understands the data, the application, and together it sort of makes this powerhouse, right? And I love that, right? Because it's not thinking about it as teams, it's thinking about that as a team. That's what partnership is.
Right.
Fantastic. Okay, so at this point, I'll talk a little bit about the things that Mission offers in a little bit more specificity, because we talked kind of generally about how Mission has helped the Celtics, but we've got a variety of cloud services and consulting services, right? So on the cloud services side, when we talked about cost optimization and sort of the best practices, we have a service there called Cloud Foundation, and this is a service that the Celtics take advantage of, and it's a cost-neutral service. So it doesn't cost you anything to join up with this. And for that, you get access to these cloud analysts who help you with your cost optimization. They provide you with great insights. You get cloud health, which otherwise you'd have to pay for. And then we have kind of the 24-hour support, right? And that is Mission Cloud Care. And our operations team, 24/7, like I said, they're all 100% AWS certified. They're there to respond and to answer questions about AWS, about the infrastructure, about things that are going on operationally. And then Cloud One, which is this fantastic service where we actually instrumented the Celtics environment with New Relic, which is a top-tier observability platform. And our team is watching, making sure that everything is running as expected. We're on the same page about what to do if there is an incident. We have runbooks. We're helping do automated backups and managing those for the Celtics. In addition, we have some other services like MDR in partnership with Alert Logic to kind of help customers with their security posture and incident response and remediation. And I think the real linchpin here is this Mission Cloud Elevate service, right? And it's had multiple names over the years, Jay. But this is the service where you get this cloud solutions architect who really represents that trusted advisor and expert. And Jay's had a couple of these people over the years. Other than making sure they know how to pronounce the Celtics, because sometimes they're not super into sports, they're not the Celtics, okay? Come on, CSAs, get it right, it's the Celtics. You know, that really makes a huge difference. You get this trusted advisor. We have a whole team on the back end that is, you know, delivering on your roadmap and making sure everything is moving forward. And then I mentioned the consulting services, a whole bunch of different expertise areas, serverless, migrations, data analytics, machine learning, all sorts of good stuff. And the Celtics are one of our customers who takes advantage of a lot of this stuff, which is fantastic. Okay, so before we get to the questions, we have about 7 or 8 minutes left for that. So please, again, pepper us with questions. Otherwise, Jay and I will make sure we ask each other some questions. But this is a little special offer we have for all of you fantastic people who are watching today. We're offering a free 1 hour, 60-minute assessment with one of our solutions architects, right? They'll sit down with you and understand kind of your initiatives that you have, what's going on in your environment. Are you leveraging AWS best practices? You can bring architecture diagrams to them. You can bring any challenges and insights. And they'll spend an hour with you and really figure out, like, okay, do you have this? Or what are some recommendations we have for you? Or, hey, maybe we can help you, and here's how. So this is a great opportunity to sit down with an AWS expert and kind of just gut check, right? How are things going in my environment? What are my challenges? All right. So with that, let's talk about some questions and answers. And audience, who've all been very attentive, and I see, many of you have stuck around, almost all of you, but I'm not seeing a ton of questions. So Jay, maybe I can ask you a question. I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. What is sort of your vision for kind of the next big phase? Like, what are you trying to achieve next?
Well, as you alluded to, we've done some POCs and we're doing some testing on finally sort of getting rid of MS SQL being the core of this. Although we're not running an MS SQL server anymore, MS SQL in RDS, the database as a service, if you will, is still at the core. And so a more data lake architecture with a more modern tool that we're playing with at the moment in AWS is sort of the current big push we've got going on, that we've finally decided that it is time to give up. I know the first MS SQL database that many of those tables still exist was probably written almost 15 years ago, I bet, maybe more. And so it's time, and I've been asking the data guys, and I'm not a coder or a data guy, but I've been asking them for a long time, well, when, at some point it's got to be time, and the answer generally is, well, no, it's too hard. I don't know how we ever get out of the MS SQL thing. And as Jonathan alluded to, when they finally sat down and started doing it, it's hard, but it turned out it wasn't nearly as hard as we thought to lift that data and put it into a different architecture. I call it data lake. I don't know. Is that an outdated term? Do people still say data lake? Okay.
Oh, well, there's all sorts of things now. Data swamps, data lakes. Yeah, great. Thank you for that, Jay. I'm excited about the next chapter.
Along the way, one thing we didn't touch on is that along this whole way, we also use our AWS infrastructure as somewhat a parallel backup to our on-prem non-analytics platform, Windows and Active Directory and things. And so we've also brought that along every step of the way. And that wasn't really mentioned, but so now I have an AD controller that's built in Terraform, actually a pair of them, because I always like to have 2 AD controllers everywhere still. And so, but they're built in Terraform, and they're in the new security architecture and in the new VPC. And so that is a good sort of backup and parallel universe to my on-prem stuff. And someday we'll pull the plug on the on-prem stuff between, all the modern SaaS applications and Microsoft 365 and the stuff we've got in AWS. There really is not much reason to run these servers here in my room any longer, other than I like computers.
Amazing. Yes, fantastic. And we're coming up on 3 minutes left. There are 2 questions that have rolled in, but before we end and answer those questions, I'm going to actually ask you that very important question while I launch this poll for everyone. And folks, this is basically just asking you if you'd be interested in having a conversation with a solutions architect at Mission. Actually, it looks like it closed. Actually, Melissa, would you go ahead and share that for me? Because I was doing it improperly. Thank you, our fantastic Melissa in the background. So feel free to answer this poll question and let us know if you'd like to talk to a solutions architect at Mission. But the most important question came in, Jay, and I'm going to put you on the spot. This came in from Jan. Do you think the Celtics will win it all this year?
I don't like to make predictions, but I will say that I've been to Game 7 of the finals twice. We won it once. It is really hard to win a championship in pro sports. Everything has to go your way, and you can't have any missteps, injuries, whatever. It's really hard. We saw that last year where Brooklyn Nets probably should have won it all, but didn't even get to the conference finals. Or I guess they did get to the conference finals, but because of injuries, they did not get to the finals. And so I don't like to make predictions, but other than to say it's really hard to win a championship. But I am hopeful. I have 1 ring, and I'd like to have at least 1 more before I retire.
Yeah, me too. I'd love to see that happen, and really excited. I think hopefully we can enable that, right? Together we can get this data processed and get the coaches to get the right players on the team.
The name of the game. I mean, the reason we do this is to try and win more ball games. So that if all this data work and all this money we spend, wins 1 or 2 or 3 extra ball games a year, well, then it's worth it, because that's all it takes is 1 or 2 or 3 extra ball games. Yeah.
Exactly. All right, well, we're at the end of our time. Jay, thank you so much again. It's always a pleasure. I love doing this. I cannot wait till we can get back to doing this in person. So everybody stay safe. Do what you can to get us through this thing. And thank you for being here. A reminder, you can email us at solutions@missioncloud.com. You can go to our website. You can call the phone number. For those of you who answered yes on the poll question, we'll reach out to you. And thank you so much again, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks.
See you.